Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Jennifer Ahern. I am the Chief Officer and Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Culture. I'm joined this morning by the Honourable Premier and Minister for Home Affairs, Health and Culture, Alda McLaughlin, and Mr. Julian Bromhead from AMEC Foster Wheeler. We're here this morning to provide you an update on the Integrated Solid Waste Management System project, and I'm going to start off by asking the Premier to offer some remarks. Premier?
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. As Ms. Ahern has said, we wanted you to come this morning so that we could provide an update on the work of the consultants, AMEC Foster Wheeler, on the Integrated Solid Waste Management Systems, or ISWIMS as we call it, project. As you will recall, in late 2014, AMEC Foster Wheeler, a global leader in clean energy and environment and infrastructure markets, won the consultancy to prepare a national solid waste management strategy that will determine the direction of solid waste management in the Cayman Islands for the next 50 years. The company will also prepare an outline business case and provide procurement support for the solid waste management project determined by the strategy. To ensure a thorough state of the environment is taken into account in the preparation of the strategy and future project. Over the course of the past 2 weeks, from the 6th to the 20th of this month, AMEC Foster Wheeler representatives conducted work at the landfills on all 3 Cayman Islands. The team installed new monitoring wells and conducted groundwater sampling at the Georgetown and Cayman Brac locations. Sediment samples were taken from the North Canal in Georgetown and out into the North Sound. Water and biological sampling, as well as landfill gas, hydrogen sulfide, and dust sampling have all been taken. Leading the investigative work is the Associate Director, AMEC Foster Wheeler Environment and Infrastructure UK Limited, Julian Bromhead, who is the environmental lead on our Integrated Solid Waste Management Systems project. Other team members in Cayman conducting the environmental work were environmental engineer Simon Howard and environmental technician Matthew Corcoran. The visiting team's findings will be compiled into a landfill site environmental review report, which will be made available to the public when the report is completed. I would like to thank the Cayman Islands Government's Integrated Solid Waste Management Systems Project Manager, Jim Schubert, the Department of Environmental Health, and the Department of the Environment for the combined effort in hosting and enabling the team's work whilst they were in the Cayman Islands. The Georgetown and Sister Islands landfills continue to be a matter of primary focus for the government. With this latest exercise, we continue to be closer to enacting a more comprehensive and sustainable waste management system in the Cayman Islands.
As the Premier mentioned, Mr. Julian Bromhead and his team have been here for the last 2 weeks conducting additional site visits to the 3 landfills. So I'm going to now ask Mr. Bromhead to just say a few remarks in terms of what they've seen in the last 2 weeks of their work.
Thank you. Yes, my specialism is in the investigation and assessment of landfills, and I've been coordinating the survey work at Georgetown landfill, out on the Brac landfill and Little Cayman landfill over the last 2 weeks. As the Premier has said, we've undertaken quite a wide variety of monitoring. Just to give a very quick synopsis, at Georgetown there's been some additional groundwater monitoring wells installed. The site has existing groundwater monitoring boreholes, and they've been monitored since 2005 on an annual or every other year basis, and the work we've done is to supplement the existing groundwater monitoring network. The scope of all the surveys that we've done has been informed by some visits to the landfills we did last November. And since then, we've undertaken a review of the existing monitoring information that's available for the landfills. There has in the past been a program of sampling in terms of groundwater, surface water, and soils at Georgetown, and we've reviewed that information, and that's then helped us to target some of the further work that we've done at Georgetown. So we've done groundwater sampling on all of the wells, existing and new wells. We've also sampled surface water around the site in the canal that runs along the north side of the site, and we've also done surface water sampling at the mouth of the canal to North Sound and actually out into North Sound itself. We've also taken some sediment samples from the canal and from North Sound, together with some biological samples from the North Sound in terms of some seagrass, some algae, and seaweed. So we've got a selection of biological samples. All of the samples that have been collected have been shipped back to the US for analysis. In terms of gas and dusts, we've installed a number of gas monitoring probes into the waste on the Georgetown landfill so that we can monitor the gas composition within the waste, and also to see what trace gases are present within that gas within the landfill. Again, those samples are under test. We've done boundary monitoring surveys, particularly for hydrogen sulfide, which is one of the more odorous gases which are present around the Georgetown site. And we've also been doing some monitoring in terms of dust deposition and dust sampling out at Georgetown. On Cayman Brac had no existing environmental monitoring information available for the landfill, so this is the first time that samples have been collected. There were 4 groundwater monitoring boreholes installed at Cayman Brac. They've been sampled. The groundwater's been sampled at Cayman Brac. We've also taken surface water samples from some of the ponds around the Cayman Brac site, and we've also done some gas sampling and analysis from the Brac site. And then on Little Cayman, which is actually a landfill, but in fact all the wastes on Little Cayman are burned, so it's more of a burning ground. We've done some soil sampling out on Little Cayman, and we've also sampled some of the surface water features around the Little Cayman site. So I said a lot of all the samples have now been shipped back to the US and are undergoing analysis. I think in terms of program, those analyses will be running over the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're looking to report the findings through to the government towards the end of June. That's the program that we're currently working to.
Okay, thanks very much, Julian. Just as a reminder to everybody in terms of the project and what AMEC are doing for us, there's 3 main deliverables from the contract that we have with AMEC. They've partnered with KPMG. The first one, of course, is the National Solid Waste Management Strategy. We are working right now, we've had some work with the steering committee and with AMEC. We're hoping to have a draft strategy out for public consultation by the end of May. The next one of this background work that they've been doing in terms of the environmental site assessments, that will be fed into the process where we're looking at the preferred project options and the outline business case, assessing the options. So that's the next stage of the process that KPMG will be taking the lead on with AMEC, and that's scheduled to run from July through to the end of the calendar year. So come the end of the calendar year, we should have the results of the outline business case, which will be the basis on which we go forward into the procurement of the preferred project option that's been identified, and that's the final deliverable for the contract that we have with AMEC. So right now we are on track as in terms of delivering a strategy by the end of June, and the OBC is on track to start in July of this year. So with that, I'll just open the floor up if there were any questions. Morning, Carsley.
I just had a couple of housekeeping questions. The monitoring wells, those are something that you'll keep looking at over a while, or is that a one-shot?
No. As I said, at Georgetown, the groundwater monitoring wells there have been monitored every year or every other year, I think, since 2005. we've reviewed that existing data. We've installed some additional wells to fill gaps in the network. When we get those results back of the sampling of the existing and the new wells, we'll then make a recommendation as to the frequency for further sampling. So in the past, DEH has done periodic sampling. We'll make some recommendations as to the frequency for further sampling depending on these latest set of results.
I think just for some clarification, the draft strategy will be in by May, but then this information will be added to that after the draft?
No, this information is the information that we're going to get from these site assessments is to give us some data in terms of the conditions that we have on the sites and flag any concerns that there might be, sort of inform some operational decisions. And when we're going into the outline business case assessment of the different project options, this sort of information will be sort of fed into that process. Some of the preliminary findings will inform the discussions on the strategy in terms of, the National Waste Management Strategy is going to look at sort of our vision, our values, our strategic directions and objectives for waste management overall in the Cayman Islands, not just in terms of finding a particular project option, but looking at an overall policy framework that will guide us. So the strategy doesn't need to be held up for these results, nor does the work on the OBC. The KPMG will be able to start doing the work on the OBC once we've got the shortlisted project options, some of the background information and so on that they need to start that work. So, okay.
Yeah, can I just ask Mr. Bromhead, what kind of environmental impacts might you...
Sorry. What kind of environmental impacts might you expect to see from the landfill site? What are your tests set up to find, and how can you mitigate those if you do find them? Just thinking about things such as leaching in the North Sound and any gases that may be a problem for the community.
Okay. As in terms of impacts on waters, I can only really talk about information from the existing data which exists from the groundwater and surface water monitoring, because obviously we're not in receipt of the results from the latest round. I think looking at the results from previous surveys, there's been no hazardous substances detected that are at significant concentrations in water. But there are some nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, which are being leached from the landfill, which are getting into groundwaters and surface waters. And they have a local impact at the canal mouth around the canal entry into North Sound, just by the increased nutrients give increased levels of chlorophyll and algae at that location. So we need to see what the new data is showing in terms of the dispersion of those nutrients actually out into the wider North Sound, which we'll get from this existing data.
What can you do about it if you do find that there's an issue?
Well, ultimately, potentially it's looking at closing and capping the landfill site to stop, to limit further leaching of nutrients from the site. I mean, there is no quick short-term fix, but these investigations are designed to provide scientific data in terms of looking at what needs to be done in terms of the closure of the site and how the sites, particularly the Georgetown site, is actually closed and capped.
How does that fit, Mr. Premier, with the intent, as I understand it, to keep that site as the basis of operations?
Well, I think there are two things that we're talking about. The bit of the bit is the wrong word because it's a big area. The area of the landfill, which is already essentially closed in terms of material being added to it, is the area that we're speaking about capping and to prevent rainwater penetration, which then promotes the leaching into the sound. But in terms of the overall site, I mean, what we've said is that we don't want to go create a landfill somewhere else. But other aspects, because we're just replicating the problem somewhere else. But aspects of waste management strategy, such as composting, recycling, and so forth, there's nothing at all to prevent those aspects of the project being managed somewhere else.
To the extent that you require landfill, it'll stay where it is, and just on a different part of the site
For the foreseeable future. I mean, a big part of the strategy has to be reducing the amount of stuff that actually goes into a landfill. And we're already talking about what I regard as a fairly quick and easy win is, boosting the composting and the amount of composting that we do, and moving that aspect of it off-site. That'll significantly reduce the amount of stuff that actually gets put into the landfill, while we look at and examine the recommendations about what else it is that we do on that particular site.
Do you have any sort of preliminary thoughts from I know the strategy's not coming out to the end of May, but it must be close to having some idea what you want to do.
Certainly the focus is to look at a sustainable integrated system with a focus, as the Premier said, on minimizing the amount of waste that ultimately ends up needing to be landfilled. So we're going to be looking at other components of a system, enhancing recycling, looking at composting, looking at refusing, waste reduction, to try and make sure that we're minimizing what we ultimately have to put in the landfill. We tomorrow we'll be here announcing the winners of our waste pyramid poster and essay competition. But if you look at the hierarchy, the bottom, the smallest bit, is the disposal, and that's really what's going to guide us going forward. Is a vision of having an integrated, sustainable system where we're minimizing the amount of waste that we have to actually landfill, with the view, as the Premier said, to looking at other components at other areas, not necessarily on the Georgetown landfill site for Grand Cayman.
You're going to need some kind of landfill regardless of what measures you adopt. Because even if you go to waste to energy, the residual stuff that remains, the bottom ash and fly ash, has to be disposed of somewhere. When we went to Tampa, I mean, we looked at that, where there are these massive waste to energy plants that are burning everything, but they still produce residue, and you've got to dispose of that. So you've got to have a facility somewhere where you bury this stuff. So there's just no way around it.
Morning, panel. Premier, have you guys considered where those other sites may possibly be if it is presented to do some parts of the separation and recycling somewhere else?
We're looking at a number of sites now, but I really don't want to mention any of those and start a campaign against it before we even have done the proper analysis.
Have you guys, has the government considered possibly sitting back down with the DART group, considering the fact that they have a large property that they invested in, which they hope to have used for that purpose? You've renegotiated other deals on behalf of the government. Wouldn't this be a possibility? Has your government considered that?
Well, I don't know that I want to get into any of that and start the Bordentowners raging again about the possibility of a facility there. But it is a possibility that can be looked at. We haven't approached DART about it, and we haven't really given that a great deal of consideration. We are really at the very early stages of thinking about these things and where they could possibly be located, bearing in mind access by the general public to them and convenience and so forth, a whole range of considerations. But really at the very, very early stages of thinking about that aspect of it.
I just think it's really important to remember that at this point in time, we don't know what the project is going to be. And it's very difficult for us to say with any definitive statements. that we're going to be siting X facility in this area, because there is the possibility that when we get through the outline business case, the preferred project option will be entirely contained on our existing landfill sites in all 3 islands. At this point in time, we really don't know. So we are going to push ahead, as the Premier said, with some efforts at looking at enhancing public education in terms of the importance everybody's role in reducing waste, looking at enhancing recycling efforts, looking at some other measures that we can put in place along the way that won't act as constraints once we identify what the preferred project is through the outline business case process. So just to sort of keep in mind that we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in our discussions today, because we don't actually know yet what that project is going to look like. So.
That is a fair statement, but that being said, is it fair enough to say that there is a possibility that it could be anywhere in Cayman, and because you don't know what to expect, there is a possibility that people of Bontown, West Bay, East and North Side, or even Cayman Brac may find themselves with a new site that deals with waste in this country?
Yeah, absolutely. The cabinet policy guidance that is guiding the steering committee's work and AMEC's work through this process says that in terms of a landfill for Grand Cayman, we will not have another landfill site other than the existing Georgetown landfill site. So that's one constraint that we're working. That's one of the guiding parameters that we have in terms of landfilling. But you're absolutely correct that other components may be located on other sites, or they may not.
Can you, Premier, give me the estimated cost to have the advisors here to give government this advice on policy? Or an estimated idea?
Well, this is, I'll let Ms. Ahern answer that, but you need to remember that it was a competitive bid for providing the consultants on this project. So the costs are all outlined in that and have been previously announced, but I'll let.
Do you want the cost of this consultancy or the
Yes.
cost of the project?
Consultancy.
Okay, I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but it was in the region of $500,000.
Okay, perfect. Ms. Ahern, you can probably answer this question. Is there any chance of getting an update on the tire dilemma? The last time I know that you guys put out a tender for it. Where is it at? What's the plan?
I understand that the latest advert for the tire RFP is in today's paper. So we are back out looking once again for proposals for people to come forward and make a submission through the central tenders process for dealing with the tires.
I am aware that the last time there was discussions with a developer for the East End project. Is that done for? What's the latest with that? Is that fall through? What?
We didn't receive a bid from that particular developer in the last tender process. So as I said, we're out now. We're going through the central tenders process of the competitive bids. So we'll have to wait and see what bids we get in this time, whether they submit one.
Okay. Question for Mr. Julian. Are you concerned about any of the tests based on what you saw in your experience as a professional? Are you concerned that there's might be getting back some pretty bad results? Because, I mean, as you are aware, that landfill site has been there for a long time. There's been no guidelines on what to dump, how to dump, those kinds of things. With your experiences of seeing other places, do you have any serious fears?
Well, I've already explained the situation regarding the groundwaters and surface waters based on the existing monitoring. So there's nothing in terms of the monitoring that's been done other than the nutrient load to suggest that there's an issue in terms of the waters. In terms of gas, that the site, as all landfills do, is producing landfill gas, which is predominantly a mixture of methane and carbon dioxide. So that's being emitted into the atmosphere. We've done sampling to try and identify what other trace compounds are present within that gas. I don't expect that they'll be at levels which are of any concern in terms of human health, but we await that data through. The other monitoring that we've been doing around the site is in terms of hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide's the sort of typically the bad egg type gas odor that you can detect at very low concentrations, and the the data that we've got suggests that it's not the landfill that's the primary source of hydrogen sulfide odours in that area. And certainly the concentrations that we've been measuring are well below any thresholds where it would be of concern to human health. So it's more of a nuisance. They're more nuisance levels rather than a level which is of any concern to human health.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said. Are you suggesting that the levels that you've seen so far are not dangerous to human health? Is that
Correct. Yes. In terms
so
of the
there are some
sulfide.
test results already then?
Yes, with field monitoring, yes.
Last question for the Premier. In regards to the PPM Constitution, what was the plan for waste management, or is it the hope that the results of the AMEC report that will guide your policy moving forward with dealing with waste management?
PPM Constitution?
I mean, sorry, not Constitution, manifesto. I
Manifesto.
apologize, sir.
Well, we didn't, obviously, when you're outside of government, it's very difficult to understand all of the intricacies of it. We made certain commitments. One was to seek to find a waste management strategy for the country. And we also stated very categorically that we were not going to place a landfill in Borden Town. We made those commitments. But beyond that, not a great deal of detail. So the purpose of this exercise has been and continues to be to develop a national waste management strategy that will serve the Cayman Islands for the next 50 years. That's why we're not rushing off doing this bit here and that bit there. A lot of people are impatient because the landfill is a really sore point for many people. But we've got to make sure that what we do actually does deliver the country a cost-effective, long-term strategy, not just some quick fix which we have to revisit in another 5 or 10 years.
Okay, so is it realistically to say that there's a chance that the starting point for the new way forward for waste management in this country may not be done by the end of this term?
Well, once we get the outline business case, we'll go to bid for delivery on those strategies probably about this time next year. So it's certainly, the project will be started, but certainly will not be finished by the end of this term. But there are other aspects that, and that's what we were starting to talk about a little while ago, to discuss a little while ago, of changing people's attitudes to waste locally. One thing we know, we don't need the consultants to tell us, is that what we need to do is to reduce the amount of waste that actually goes into any landfill. So we can start working on strategies to do that. Composting is one, getting people to contribute to the recycling effort with more enthusiasm than is currently the case. Talking to people who are involved in recycling about how government can actually assist them in their efforts. Those are some of the things that we are looking at and are going to be looking at while the rest of this process is moving ahead.
Is there any possibilities of privatization, or are you going to have to wait until that report comes in to see what is suggested? Because you really don't know what they're going to come back with at this point. So there's no true picture of what to expect.
Right. I think we know what the range of possibilities are. I mean, having looked around the rest of the world.
What are they?
But one, well, there's the recycling, waste to energy, composting, the whole range of various things to manage waste, municipal waste. But one thing that we also recognize is that the fix for the landfill is going to be very expensive. And so there has to be, in terms of overall waste management strategy, this has to be a public-private partnership. Government is not going to be able, regardless of who's at the helm, to come up with the kind of money that we're talking about to provide a proper waste management strategy. And so we certainly want and are aiming to have as much private sector involvement in these strategies as possible. And recycling is one that is probably the best example that is on the way now. Private sector have engaged their at least 3, maybe more than that, companies that are involved in one or other aspect of recycling, because they believe that it is something that could be profitable. And so that's what we want to encourage. That's the road down which we want to go. Limit government's involvement as far as possible, in particularly in underwriting the cost of whatever it is that we do.
Okay. Last question, and sorry, this is it for me. And it's off topic. I apologize, but we don't get very much opportunities to speak with you, Premier. So I have to take this opportunity to ask it now. The opposition leader made a motion the other day to have, I'm quite sure you're aware of it, everybody's talking about it. Do we have any idea? Can you give the country a timeline for when that motion can be heard? And second question, do you deny being involved in any conspiracy with the last governor and commissioner to unseat the now opposition leader? Have you had any email contact, memo contact, text, by phone, or any other contact with the governor at that time with the conspiracy to unseat the now opposition leader?
The only thing I'm going to say is, and this is probably quite wrong, but the leader of the opposition, certainly with respect to anything he said about me, is a liar. Plain and simple. If he can produce one email in a correspondence between me and the governor, let's see.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Let's see.
Andrea?
Wow. Back in topic. Just to clarify here, was the entire landfill tested? And if that was not the case, what area was tested? What percentage did you test? And why not everything? Because somewhere along the lines, I was under the impression it was everything, but the Premier said there was a particular area that was tested. Am I wrong in thinking?
No. The investigations were targeted, taking into account particularly at Georgetown, the existing information that was available. So we've targeted the investigation to consider what the likely sources are on the landfill, so for example, the gas, and what the likely receptors are, for example, the residential developments to the west of the landfill site. So the investigation has been undertaken that considers those sources which are potentially present on the landfill and the receptors, so the receptors being residential development or water quality and or sound. So it's been targeted, it's a targeted investigation, and that's equally been the case on the smaller sister island landfills.
How does our landfill compare to landfills that you or your company have tested and reviewed elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I think a similar question was asked at the last press briefing we had in November. Obviously, the Cayman Island landfills are not don't have any engineering containment currently. Landfills within the UK and the US will have engineering. Certainly, currently operational sites will have engineered containment. That would be part of the strategy in terms of dealing with residual waste or products from any waste to energy plant or other waste treatment process. There'll always be a need to have some residual waste capacity, but that would be moving into the future within a containment. So that's I guess the primary difference between the Cayman sites and sites in the UK and the US.
You said earlier that there were some preliminary findings that you were able to deduce based on studies in the field. For those particular findings, are there any potential suggestions that you can produce right now for the ones that you found? Yeah.
Well, I think as we've already covered, ultimately the capping of the landfill is going to be the key measure, remediation measure, both to prevent rainfall leaching through the wastes and then mobilising contamination into water. and also then to be able to capture the landfill gas which is currently within the site. That gas, because it's typically 50% methane, is an energy resource. So once the site is capped, there's then the ability to put wells into the waste, collect landfill gas, put it through an engine and produce electricity. So part of the strategy will look at the potential for programming for capping the currently filled areas of the site, and whether when that process of recovery can actually begin.
Okay. Were there any other questions?
And my question to you just now, you didn't answer whether or not you can give the country a timeline for when that motion will be heard in the House.
I don't know. The motion is being dealt with by the Speaker. There were some, I gather that there were some constitutional issues that had to be considered with respect to it. And I don't know if she's approved the motion yet. Up until Friday, the motion had not been approved.
Well, the allegations are a very serious one, not only against you, but against the country as a whole. And internationally, this is obviously not a good thing for us. Is it your priority to get it addressed with as soon as possible?
It is the furthest thing from a priority. The priority next is the budget for the country. It is easy, so easy to make allegations. And Mr. Bush is prone to making allegations. So the motion, assuming that it meets the constitutional and requirements and conforms with standing orders, the motion will get on the order paper at some point. It is certainly not a priority of mine.
Right. All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow when we announce the winners of our essay and poster competition for waste management. Have a wonderful day, and thanks again for coming.